Captain Marcus Steele had never imagined that his first official mission as a human diplomat would lead him to the distant planet of Zalura, a world of towering cities, lush forests, and advanced technology. Zalura was known throughout the galaxy for its strength and unity. The Zalurans themselves were a proud and noble species, with skin that shimmered like polished silver and eyes that glowed with the wisdom of their centuries-old civilization. Marcus had been briefed extensively before his arrival. He knew his mission: to establish peaceful relations between the human colonies and the Zaluran Empire. But no amount of training could prepare him for the unexpected events that would unfold. As part of the diplomatic customs, Marcus was invited to attend a grand dinner hosted by the High Chancellor Velria. She was the ruler of Zalura, a figure of immense power and respect, known for her sharp mind and unyielding strength. Her reputation had reached Earth even before Marcus had set foot on her planet. He knew that this dinner would be a delicate affair, one that could shape the future of human-Zaluran relations. The dinner was held in a vast hall, adorned with glowing plants and shimmering crystals. The Zalurans had a unique way of blending nature with technology, and the result was breathtaking. As Marcus entered the hall, he was greeted by a chorus of voices in the native Zaluran language. Though he didn't understand the words, the warmth in their tone was unmistakable. Valeria stood at the head of the table, towering over everyone in the room. Her presence was commanding, and despite her regal beauty, there was an air of fierceness about her that made Marcus feel both awe and nervousness. She was tall, much taller than any human he had ever met, with skin that reflected the ambient light like the surface of a polished mirror. Her silver eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion as he approached. "Welcome, Captain Steele," she said in perfect English, her voice deep and commanding. "It is an honor to have you on Zalura. I trust you will enjoy our hospitality." Marcus bowed his head slightly, offering a smile. "Thank you, High Chancellor. It is an honor to be here. I look forward to learning more about your people." The dinner began, and the conversation flowed smoothly. Marcus was impressed by the intelligence and grace of the Zalurans as they spoke about their history, their culture, and their vision for the future. But throughout the evening, his thoughts kept drifting back to Velria. There was something about her that intrigued him: her strength, her confidence, and the way she commanded the room without even trying. She wasn't just a leader, she was a force of nature. As the meal progressed, a servant brought out a large golden fruit, something Marcus had never seen before. The fruit was round, with a translucent skin that glowed softly in the dim light. It was placed in front of Velria, who smiled and gestured for Marcus to try it. "This is the Zaluran gift," she explained, her voice smooth and inviting. "It is a rare delicacy that symbolizes unity between our people. It is said that those who partake in it will form an unbreakable bond." Marcus, ever the diplomat, didn't want to offend anyone by refusing. He took a bite of the fruit, savoring its sweet, exotic flavor. As he chewed, he noticed the eyes of the other Zalurans on him, watching intently. Velria's smile widened. "You have honored us, Captain Steele. You have consumed the gift. That means—" Marcus, unsure of what she meant, smiled back nervously. "It's delicious. I'm honored." But Velria's smile faltered, and for the first time that evening, a shadow crossed her face. The atmosphere in the room shifted, and the quiet murmurs of the Zalurans grew louder. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Had he done something wrong? "What's happening?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Velria's silver eyes narrowed, and she stood up abruptly, her tall figure towering over the table. "You have done more than simply taste the fruit, Captain Steele," she said, her voice now tinged with something darker, anger, perhaps, or disbelief. "You have consumed it in its entirety. And that means—" The room went silent, and the weight of her words hung in the air. Marcus blinked, not fully understanding what she was saying. He had only eaten a fruit. How could that have led to anything else? "It means that you have unknowingly bound yourself to me in a way that no one, not even the most experienced diplomat, could ever foresee. Velria continued, her voice now laced with frustration. In Zalduran tradition, this act is one of courtship, a promise of unity. And yet you are human, and I am Zalduran. This should never have been possible. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. He had no idea what she was talking about. This was supposed to be a diplomatic dinner, not some ancient ritual. Yet the looks on the faces of the Zaldurans told him this was no small matter. He had unwittingly become part of something far more complicated than a simple meal. Velria's voice, now tinged with fury, broke through his thoughts. You have no idea what you've done, do you, Captain Steele? Marcus could only shake his head, feeling the weight of the situation crash down on him. Marcus stood motionless, staring at Velria as her words sank in. He had never been the type to feel out of control, but right now, he couldn't help but feel completely lost. The whole room seemed to hold its breath as the implications of his actions started to become clear. Well, as clear as it could be, given that he still didn't fully understand what had just happened. Velria's eyes, silver and unblinking, seemed to pierce right through him. Her voice, though calm, had an edge to it, like a blade hiding behind a veil of politeness. You have bound yourself to me, Captain Steele, she repeated, her words carrying the weight of something ancient and serious. You have consumed the Zalduran gift, which is a symbol of courtship between two beings. In our culture, this is not a casual gesture. It is a promise of a bond that cannot easily be broken. Marcus tried to process what she was saying. A promise. Courtship. But he hadn't even known what the fruit was, let alone its significance. He had been focused on getting through the dinner without embarrassing himself or making a diplomatic mistake, not on being part of some ancient ritual. He opened his mouth to respond, but Velria raised her hand, silencing him before he could speak. This is a serious matter, she said, her tone growing sterner. The gift is meant to create a union, one that can only be fulfilled when both parties willingly accept it. And you, Captain Steele, have unknowingly initiated the first step in that union. There is no turning back now. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to say. How could he have known? He had never been briefed on anything like this. He had assumed the dinner would be like any other formal meeting, strictly diplomatic, with no surprises. But now, everything had changed. He glanced around the room, looking for some sign of reassurance, but the faces of the Zaldurans were unreadable. Some looked curious, others confused, and a few seemed to share Velria's intensity. It was clear that this wasn't a small misunderstanding. It was something much bigger. Velria seemed to notice his uncertainty, and for the first time that evening, her expression softened, just slightly. This is a rare occurrence, she said, her voice quieter now, though still firm. The Zalduran gift does not often work with other species. It is usually ineffective when taken by anyone outside of our kind. That is why this is so unexpected. Marcus blinked, trying to wrap his mind around her words. So, you're saying this never happens. Humans and Zaldurans don't typically form these bonds. Velria shook her head slowly, her silver eyes never leaving his. No, Captain Steele. It is very rare. In fact, it is almost unheard of. The fact that the gift worked with you is something none of us could have anticipated. She turned away from him and paced across the room, her long strides echoing softly in the quiet hall. This is a sign, one that neither of us can ignore. We must follow the ancient customs, whether we like it or not. The union has been formed, and it must be honored. Marcus felt the weight of her words. It was as if the entire galaxy had just shifted beneath him. He didn't know what to do, what to say, or even how to make sense of this strange situation. But what does that mean for me? Marcus asked, his voice uncertain. What do I have to do now? Velria stopped pacing and turned back to face him, her expression now a mixture of frustration and determination. The union is not just symbolic. It has consequences, both for you and for me. Her voice hardened again. As the one who consumed the gift, you have committed to a bond with me, a bond that will affect both of us in ways you cannot yet understand." Marcus swallowed, feeling more out of his depth than ever. He had thought his mission would be about diplomacy, about fostering relationships between humans and the Zalurans. Instead, he had become entangled in something far more personal and complicated than he could have ever imagined. "But I don't even know what's expected of me," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I didn't mean to." "I know you didn't," Velria interjected quickly, her voice softer now, though still filled with the same underlying intensity. "You didn't mean to, but the consequences are real. This bond cannot be undone. It will take time for you to adjust, but I will help you understand." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of her words. How had something so simple, a piece of fruit, turned into something so life-altering? This was beyond anything he had ever expected from his mission. Velria seemed to sense his growing confusion. "The gift is not just a physical exchange," she said, her voice now surprisingly gentle. "It is also a mental and emotional connection. It means that our lives will be tied together in ways that neither of us can predict. The bond will change you, and it will change me. But we must honor it, as our cultures demand." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This was a lot to take in, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back down now. This was part of the mission, part of the responsibility he had as a human diplomat. Whatever this bond meant, he had to face it head-on. He nodded slowly, meeting Velria's gaze with newfound resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady. "If this is what's required, then I'll learn. I'll try to understand." Velria regarded him for a long moment, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of something softer in her eyes, perhaps respect, or maybe even a hint of acceptance. "You are brave, Captain Steele," she said finally. "Braver than most. We shall see how well you adapt to this new reality." The days that followed were a whirlwind for Marcus Steele. After the strange and confusing dinner, he found himself thrown into an entirely new reality, one that he hadn't been trained for during his extensive diplomatic training. He had prepared for political debates, tense negotiations, and even minor misunderstandings. What he had not prepared for was becoming unknowingly bonded to the High Chancellor of Zalura. Velria had told him that the union between them was not just a formality. It was a bond that would affect both their lives, intertwining them in ways Marcus couldn't yet understand. The days ahead were filled with awkward conversations, cultural lessons, and Marcus trying to adapt to the strange customs of the Zalurans. To say he was out of his element would be an understatement. But what surprised him most wasn't the shock of becoming part of an ancient Zaluran tradition. It was how little he knew about the customs of a species so far removed from his own. In his preparation for this mission, he had read books, attended lectures, and trained for years to understand the political landscape of Zalura. But not once had anyone mentioned anything about the gift, courtship rituals, or the consequences of eating an alien fruit. Velria, too, seemed as confused as Marcus, though for different reasons. She had spent her entire life adhering to her people's traditions. She had known what the gift meant, what the courtship meant, but never had she expected it to happen with a human. She had spent days trying to figure out how to proceed, and still, she didn't know what to make of the situation. One afternoon, Marcus found himself sitting across from Velria in a small, circular room inside the Zaluran palace. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings that told the history of Zalura, a history that spanned thousands of years. Velria had invited him to this private meeting to discuss the next steps in their union, as she called it. She had been careful to avoid using any terms that might sound too personal, but Marcus could feel the tension in the air. This was something far beyond a simple diplomatic discussion. "So, where do we go from here?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He felt out of place, unsure of the next step. "I'm still not entirely sure what this bond means for either of us." Velria sat tall and composed across from him. She regarded him with her usual intensity, though this time there was a hint of curiosity in her expression. "I'm not sure either," she admitted, her voice low and measured. "It is a rare occurrence, even for my people. I've never been in a situation like this." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and frustration. He wasn't the only one who had no idea what to do next. "So we're both just figuring this out?" he asked, trying to make sense of it all. Valeria nodded slowly. "Yes, there are rituals, traditions that must be followed, but they are not easy. And they were never meant for someone like you." Marcus frowned. "Someone like me," she sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Humans and Zalurans are not compatible in many ways. Our biology, our customs, our way of thinking, it is all different. The gift is meant to form a bond between two beings of the same species, not one from each side of the galaxy." "I don't get it," Marcus said, feeling a little more frustrated. "Why would you have a ritual like this if it's so rare, so difficult? What's the point?" Valeria looked at him, her silver eyes filled with something close to sadness. "The point, Captain Steele, is that our people believe in unity. It is what has kept Zalura strong for millennia. Our rituals, no matter how complicated, are about forging connections, about bringing together the different parts of our world to create something greater." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He had always thought of diplomacy as a way to bring people together, to find common ground. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't just about politics. It was about biology, culture, and something much more personal. "So, how do we connect?" Marcus asked, unsure of what he was really asking. "What happens next in this ritual?" Valeria straightened up in her seat, her eyes flickering with an emotion Marcus couldn't quite place. "The next step is learning about each other, really learning. We will spend time together, exchanging our knowledge, our culture. You will understand my people, and I will understand yours." Marcus nodded slowly, trying to wrap his mind around it. "And that's it." "It's a start," Valeria said, her voice softer now. "You may find it strange, but it is the only way for us to move forward. If we do not understand each other's differences, this bond will not survive, and our people's future could be in jeopardy." Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. He couldn't help but wonder how much of the future of human-Zalduran relations rested on his shoulders. He had been sent here to build diplomatic ties, but now it felt as though he had become part of something much bigger than that. "Well, I'm willing to try," he said finally, feeling more determined than ever. "If this is the way forward, then I'll learn. I'll do my part." Valeria looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. We will begin tomorrow." As Marcus left the room, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. He didn't know what the future held, but he was certain of one thing. He was in this for the long haul. The union between him and Valeria might have started out by accident, but it was up to him to make sure it worked, no matter how complicated or strange it might get. The following week felt like a blur for Marcus. Each day, he spent time with Valeria, learning more about Zalduran customs, culture, and history. The information was vast and fascinating, but also overwhelming. There were so many differences between their worlds that it seemed impossible to bridge them all. Yet, as difficult as it was, Marcus found himself growing more determined to make this work, not just for himself, but for the greater good of human-Zalduran relations. One day, as he sat with Valeria in the grand hall of the Zalduran palace, discussing the intricacies of Zalduran politics, a servant hurried in with urgent news. "High Chancellor Valeria, a message from the Galactic Council," the servant said breathlessly, handing over a glowing tablet. Valeria took the tablet with a quick, practiced motion, her silver eyes scanning the message. Marcus watched her carefully, noticing the way her expression shifted. It wasn't just the usual seriousness he had come to expect from her. There was something more. She looked tense. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, his curiosity piqued. Valeria's eyes flickered up from the tablet, meeting his gaze. It seems the Galactic Council has taken a sudden interest in our situation, she said, her voice tight. They want to send representatives to Zalura to observe this union. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Observe? What does that mean? Valeria sighed, setting the tablet down on the table in front of them. The Council views the bond between us as an anomaly, something unprecedented. They are concerned about its implications, both politically and biologically. They are sending envoys to ensure that our species can handle such a union. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. It made sense that the Galactic Council would want to investigate. After all, a human and a Zaluran forming a bond was unheard of. But he couldn't help but feel a little nervous about the attention. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was personal, too. They'll be arriving tomorrow, Valeria continued, her voice growing colder. And we will need to present ourselves as united. This is no longer just a diplomatic matter. It is a test of our ability to work together despite our differences. Marcus found himself spending even more time with Valeria as they prepared for the next phase. It wasn't just about learning each other's cultures anymore. Now, they were expected to demonstrate that their connection was not only real, but also capable of bringing their species closer together in meaningful ways. The palace was quieter than usual that morning, the grand hall empty except for Marcus and Valeria. They sat across from each other in the same room where they had first met, a place that now felt strangely familiar to Marcus. So, Marcus said, breaking the silence, "What's next? The Council is watching us closely. We need to show that this bond is more than just a formality." Valeria looked at him for a long moment, her silver eyes reflecting the weight of their shared responsibility. "I believe they are looking for something deeper, something beyond just words," she said softly. "They want to see if we can truly unite our species, not just in theory, but in practice." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. Words could only do so much. The Council wanted action. They wanted proof that a human and a Zaluran could work together, not just in diplomatic circles, but on a more personal level. The success of their bond might very well depend on how well they could bridge the gap between their two cultures. A week later, the first test arrived. Valeria had invited Marcus to participate in a Zaluran tradition called the Unity Challenge, an ancient ritual designed to test the strength of alliances between different species. It was a physical and mental test, requiring cooperation and trust. It was also one of the most important customs of the Zaluran people, and they had never invited an outsider to take part before. "Are you ready for this?" Valeria asked, her voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Marcus looked at her with determination. "I'm ready. If this is what it takes to prove that we're united, then I'll do it." The Unity Challenge took place in a large open arena located outside the palace. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers and the distant hum of the Zaluran city. Marcus had never seen anything quite like it. The arena was circular, with towering stone pillars and an intricate mosaic of alien symbols etched into the floor. Around the arena stood a crowd of Zalurans, their silver eyes fixed on the two participants. The atmosphere was tense, the energy palpable as the challenge was about to begin. "Remember," Valeria said quietly, "the challenge will require us to work together in ways that may be difficult. You must trust me, Captain Steele. Trust is the key." Marcus nodded, his nerves steadied by her words. He had learned to trust Valeria over the past few weeks, even though their connection was still new and uncertain. She had shown him nothing but honesty, and he knew he needed to return that trust if they were to succeed. The first trial began. A series of obstacles appeared in the center of the arena, large stones to climb, narrow paths to cross, and strange mechanisms that required both strength and intellect to operate. It was a test of coordination, a test of how well Marcus and Valeria could combine their skills. The first obstacle was a massive stone wall that seemed impossible to climb. The crowd watched intently as Valeria immediately started scaling it with ease, her limbs moving fluidly as if she had done it 100 times before. Marcus, on the other hand, hesitated. He wasn't a climber by nature, and he could feel his heart racing. "Don't think, just act," Velria called down to him. "Trust me." With a deep breath, Marcus pushed himself forward, grabbing onto the stone wall. His fingers slipped at first, but then he heard Velria's voice again, calm and encouraging. She extended a hand down to him, steadying him as he found his grip. Slowly, carefully, he climbed, using the guidance she offered. Together, they reached the top. The crowd erupted in applause, but there was no time to celebrate. The second trial was already being set up, a maze of glowing vines that twisted and turned, seemingly leading in all directions. "This one is trickier," Velria said, her eyes scanning the maze ahead. "We will need to think quickly, but we must also be careful not to separate." Marcus glanced at her, seeing the same determination in her eyes that he felt. "Let's do it." As they entered the maze, Marcus could feel the vines pulling at him, tugging him in different directions. They had to work together, finding their way through the maze while relying on each other's instincts. Marcus had always been good at solving problems, but this was different. This was about more than just logic. It was about intuition, about sensing the right path forward. He followed Velria's lead, trusting her judgment as she carefully navigated the glowing maze. There were moments of uncertainty, moments when it felt like they might get lost, but they kept moving forward, their teamwork growing stronger with each step. Finally, they reached the end of the maze. The crowd cheered again, and Marcus felt a rush of pride. It hadn't been easy, but they had done it together. The final trial was a simple one, but no less important. A question that had to be answered honestly and openly. It wasn't a test of strength or skill. It was a test of trust, a test of how well they had come to understand each other. Velria turned to him, her silver eyes soft but serious. "What do you believe this union will mean for our people, Captain Steele?" Marcus took a deep breath. He knew this was the most important question of all. "I believe it will show our people that despite our differences, we can be stronger together. That we can build something new, something better, by working as one." Velria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I believe you are right." As the challenge came to an end, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. They had passed the tests, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and had shown that their bond was not just real, but powerful. The Galactic Council had been watching closely, and Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. But for the first time, he felt confident. He had proven something, not just to the Council, but to himself, to Velria, and to their people. They were stronger together. The days following the Unity Challenge felt like a turning point for Marcus and Velria. Not only had they passed the tests, but they had done so in a way that seemed to leave a lasting impression on the Galactic Council and the people of Zalura. The bond between them was no longer a curious anomaly. It had become a symbol of hope, a sign that even the most unlikely alliances could thrive. As the sun set over the Zaluran city, casting a warm golden light across the palace grounds, Marcus stood outside, staring out at the vast landscape. The distant mountains loomed on the horizon, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky above. It was a peaceful moment, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was still at play. "Captain Steele," a familiar voice called from behind him. He turned to see Velria approaching, her silver eyes shining in the fading light. "I've been looking for you." Marcus smiled as she joined him on the balcony. "I guess I'm getting used to the view. It's hard to believe everything that's happened in such a short time." Velria leaned against the railing, her gaze following his. "Yes, it is. The Council is satisfied with our progress, but there's still much to be done." "I know," Marcus replied. "There's still the matter of convincing the rest of the galaxy that our union can work. Not just Zalura, but all of the species in the Galactic Council." Velria nodded thoughtfully. "It will take time, Captain. But I believe we've made a strong start. The Unity Challenge was only the first step. Marcus paused for a moment, considering her words. And what happens next? Well, for one thing, we must continue to build our relationship, not just for the council, but for the people. They need to see that this union is more than just a political alliance. It is a connection between our two species. Marcus turned to face her fully, his eyes meeting hers. That's what I've been trying to understand. What does that really mean, though? A connection between our two species. I thought we were just showing the council that humans and Zalurans can get along. Velria met his gaze with a quiet intensity. It is more than just getting along. It is about finding common ground, even where it seems impossible. Humans and Zalurans are different in many ways, but we share a common desire for peace, for growth, for understanding. That is the foundation of our bond. Marcus felt the weight of her words. It was true. Their bond had become something far deeper than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about connection on a level that transcended politics, species, and culture. I understand now, he said quietly. This isn't just about us. It's about showing the galaxy that different species can work together, not just for survival, but for something greater. Velria smiled faintly, her expression softening. Yes, exactly. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in thought, before Velria spoke again. There will be more challenges ahead. The council will continue to watch, and there are still many who doubt the success of this bond. But I believe we are on the right path. Together, we can prove them wrong. Marcus looked out over the city once more, feeling a sense of determination grow within him. This wasn't just about representing humanity. It wasn't even just about representing Velria and the Zalurans. It was about proving to the entire galaxy that unity was possible, no matter the obstacles. I'm ready for whatever comes next, he said firmly. We'll face it together. Velria nodded, a sense of pride in her gaze. Good. We've come this far, Captain Steele. And I have no doubt that we can go even further. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The council had declared that the union between Marcus and Velria was to be a model for future alliances between different species. They were to travel to different systems, meeting with various leaders, and sharing their story. It was an exhausting schedule, but both Marcus and Velria threw themselves into it with determination. Despite the pressures, their bond grew stronger. They found themselves relying on each other more and more, not just as diplomats, but as partners. They shared stories of their respective worlds, teaching each other about their customs, their beliefs, and their dreams. Slowly but surely, they began to understand one another on a level that neither had expected. It wasn't just about compromise. It was about truly understanding the other person's perspective. As they traveled from planet to planet, their bond became a symbol of hope for many. Species that had been at odds for centuries looked at Marcus and Velria and saw something that they hadn't believed was possible. Cooperation, unity, peace. One evening, after a long day of meetings and speeches, Marcus and Velria found themselves alone in a quiet garden on a distant world. The stars shone brightly above, and the air was cool and peaceful. It was one of the rare moments when they could simply relax and enjoy each other's company. I never imagined this, Marcus said quietly, gazing up at the stars. When I first came to Zalura, I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought I was just here to talk to politicians. But now it feels like I'm part of something bigger. Velria smiled softly, her gaze meeting his. You are part of something bigger, Captain Steele. We both are. And I believe that, together, we will change the course of history. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He had come to Zalura with doubts and uncertainty, but now he was sure of one thing. The future was brighter than he had ever imagined. Together, he and Velria had proven that the impossible could be achieved, that even the greatest differences could be overcome. And as they stood there, under the stars, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had shared, and for the journey that still lay ahead. The journey that Marcus and Velria had embarked on was no longer just about diplomacy. It was no longer about simply proving that two different species could coexist. It had become something deeper, something that could change the entire galaxy. The Galactic Council had been watching closely, and Marcus had begun to realize that the weight of their actions was far more significant than he had ever imagined. Their bond wasn't just a model for future alliances, it was a beacon of hope for a future of cooperation, understanding, and peace. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus and Velria continued their mission. They traveled to more planets, met with leaders of different species, and shared their story. Everywhere they went, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People who had once believed that such unions were impossible now looked to them with admiration. Their example was showing the galaxy that unity, though difficult, was possible, that differences could be overcome, and that the future didn't have to be divided. But as much as Marcus enjoyed seeing the change they were sparking, there were still challenges ahead. Old prejudices, old fears were not easily erased. Even as new alliances were formed, there were those who still doubted the possibility of peaceful coexistence. There were leaders who resisted change, who feared the unknown. One day, after another long series of meetings, Marcus and Velria found themselves once again in the quiet garden they had visited months earlier. The stars were still shining brightly above them, but this time, there was a sense of finality in the air. Their mission was nearing its end. They had done all they could to prove that their bond was real, and that it could stand as a symbol of hope for the galaxy. But the question that lingered in Marcus's mind now was what would come next. "So, what happens now?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. "We've accomplished what we set out to do. But what does the future hold for us?" Velria glanced at him, her silver eyes thoughtful. "The future is always uncertain, Captain Steele," she said softly. "But I believe the path we've created will continue to open doors for others. Our work may be done for now, but the foundation we've built will remain." Marcus looked at her, sensing that there was more she wasn't saying. "And what about us? I mean, the bond between us. Where does that go?" Valeria's expression softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. "That, too, is uncertain. But it is something we will figure out together. There is still much for us to learn about one another. But whatever the future holds, I believe that the connection we share will remain, no matter where we go." Marcus nodded, his heart feeling lighter than it had in days. Valeria was right. The future was uncertain for everyone. No one could predict what would happen next. But they had done something incredible together. They had proven that even the greatest of differences could be overcome, that even the deepest divides could be bridged. And that, in itself, was a victory. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the garden. It was a peaceful, quiet moment, and Marcus felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had come to Zolura not knowing what to expect, uncertain about his role in the grand scheme of things. But now he had a clear purpose. He had found something that transcended politics, something that was far more important than any alliance or treaty. He had found a connection. "Velria," Marcus said, turning to her with a soft smile. "I never expected this. I never thought I'd be standing here with you, having this conversation. But I'm glad I am." Velria smiled back, her silver eyes sparkling. "As am I, Captain Steele. As am I." They stood in the garden together, surrounded by the peace of the moment. They had come so far, and though the road ahead would still have its challenges, they knew they were ready for whatever came next. Together, they had shown the galaxy that anything was possible. In the distance, the first stars of the evening began to shine more brightly. The future, though unknown, was filled with endless possibilities. And Marcus, standing by Velria's side, knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The galaxy had seen their bond, and it had changed everything.